Sorry, Joe can speak to that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah,
No, I'm just grasping.
yeah, through the chair, I'll
Will you
take
go
you.
through?
Yeah. So the report is essentially outlining the same capital work that we looked over last time. But there's one difference, which I worked on two different options for it. So last time, if we recall, there is some work that we need to do around the complex arena roof this year. So there's two parts of that. One is the actual roof structure on the outside. So that is a coating that would be applied. And anyone that was walking in, if you were looking up at the roof of the arena, you'll notice that there is degradation of that structure right now. And then the other piece of that project is insulating the ceiling, so the space between the ceiling and that roof structure. We've confirmed with our consultant that that could be two distinct projects. There's a distinct advantage and distinct disadvantage of separating those two pieces. The advantage is that in 2024, it would require no borrowing to fund the total amount of the project. The disadvantage is that we're another year, so there could be cost escalation. And we have been seeing that. And there might be some mobilization cost increase. Maybe there's a little bit of an argument that those two projects are separate anyways. But there may be a cost savings in doing both of them together. So what I've presented in here, so all the information is the same. So if we go to, so those are the options that we're going to work through. And now I'll just go through, starting from page 2, going forward. So page 2, on page 2, there's the operation, the borrowing 5-year split. So this proposes that the arena roof membrane coating and the arena attic insulation be completed in the same year. Option 1, which is this piece, if we do this in this manner, it would require funding from borrowing in 2024 and 2025. So how that works, so just so you know, there was one change that I made here, and Director Davidoff on this piece, there is a change, and that change is the way that we did the taxation between S227 and S222. And so in the last one, that taxation bounced around a lot. In this one, I tried to find a pattern where the taxation would be similar going through the years. So for everybody that doesn't know, this service actually has two different services that fund one building. So what you'll notice, if you just look at that taxation part on page 3, so it says capital expenditures, then it says capital funding, and then it says taxation. So in 2024, the portion of the requisition that is allocated to either capital funding, reserve fund contribution, or loan repayment is $700,000. So that we do need to go all into S222 this year. No matter in any of the scenarios, that $700,000 needs to go there. In 2025, the taxation funding for that same pot will go to $800,000. This is based upon our strategy. We'll go to $800,000. So even next year in 2025, those amounts would need to be allocated that way. So those two pieces don't change. Where it changed from what I presented at the beginning of February is 2026, 2027, 2028. What I'm suggesting there is that we could keep taxation that's going to S222 at $725,000 throughout those years, and then it would be increasing in S227 from that point forward. That is a difference. It bounced around between the services in the previous one. So in this scenario, we would need to borrow $648,000 in 2024 and $457,000 in 2025. And that's, you can see that down where it says proceeds from borrowing. The reason for that is that essentially we deplete the reserves in S222 this year in order to do that funding. So in order to fund the projects, we need to borrow. So the only payments that we project that you would make in 2024 are interest payments. So that's about $12,417. That's the estimate. And you can see that in the first little chart that shows financing at the bottom of page 2.
3.
Oh, 3.
Joe, we lost sound for some reason.
But it
That's better.
went mute. Director Davidoff, where did it click off?
Page 3.
I missed the last couple of sentences.
Oh,
Okay.
just under financing. We'll just go from financing,
Okay.
Andy.
Yeah, that's where I think we were at, but go ahead for financing, please.
Yeah, so when we get to 2025, what's important to note is that in that 457,000 proceeds from borrowing is because we borrowed in 2024 and we're coming, there's actually, to get that proceeds and to stay within our strategic plan, that borrowing amount's actually a little bit higher because we're needing to fund the borrowing that we made in 2024. So down at the bottom are the two amortization schedules for that borrowing based upon 5 years, 5-year short-term capital borrowing terms. So that's what those two pieces represent. So that would be MFA borrowing, but the 5-year short-term capital, which is a little bit of a different program from when it's a long-term capital funding.
Joe, just
Yeah.
for the public, can you say what MFA is?
Oh, sorry, yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's the Municipal Finance Authority. So that is essentially a bank that local governments own in British Columbia. So we own that bank. There's advantages to it, well, great advantages in that we get lower interest rate, and particularly on long-term borrowing, there's other advantages that we actually get a return on our borrowing. So that is option number 1. So that's essentially what we looked at last meeting. So the pros and cons of that are that the arena roof insulation work is completely planned to be completed in 2024. The minus is that the 2025 borrowing would include the 2025 repayment in S222 to stay within the funding strategy. So that's that piece that we just talked about. Interest rates, from the last meeting, I updated the interest rates of what it was to today. And the requisition contributions were updated. So that was smoothing the contributions across S222 and S227 to avoid the drastic fluctuations. So that part is option 2. Option 2 still contemplates short-term borrowing, but that we've moved that roof insulation project to 2025. What's important about that is that would mean that in 2024 we would require no borrowing. But the risk is that there will be cost escalation. So in this scenario, if you notice under 2025, on the option 2, you will see that in 2025, I've increased the projected cost for the arena attic installation to $748,000. And if you go back to the other, to the page 2, we have it in there, $680,000.
So you only increase it by 10%?
Increase it by 10%, yeah. So that's what that represents.
But that's just your estimate.
That's just our estimate, yeah, we don't know what that might look like when we re-tender it. But so that's taken into account in these scenarios. So almost everything about this option is exactly the same, except for when we borrow. So what's important to compare here is the total financing cost at the bottom there. So if the financing is the same interest rate in 2025, there would be some suggestion that it actually might be lower. As we're projecting Bank of Canada rates to come down later this year. So it could be that it's lower, but I'm using the same interest rate in both years. So we can see there that the total borrowing cost would be estimated at $1,201,277. Where if we go back to page 3, there's just above the blue at the bottom. In that scenario, it would be 1.3,630,000 is the potential borrowing cost. So if you think about that $100,000 difference, that could mean, if everything else stays the same, that even if the roof attic insulation went up an additional $100,000, we could still be better off in option number 2. Does that make sense? Okay.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, Chair, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Okay, so that's, we saw the numbers, Joe. What is the impact on increase in taxation in each of these scenarios?
So the impact is exactly the same because the impact is already defined by the strategy that we implemented last year. So that was that there would be a requisition amount last year where we increased it. We added a requisition amount of $600,000 to fund capital reserves or borrowing. This year 7, next year 8, 9, 1, and then 1. So once it hit 1 million, we were trying to stay stable at that amount. So that scenario is exactly the same.
Okay, supplemental, Chair, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so, but we were looking at a 47% increase in taxation in S227 and 13.14% in S222. So you're saying it's still the same?
So yeah, it would still be the same. So those things, so Andy, so remember that when we go to the operational budget, which will be after this, that includes the increase for the requisition for this funding, plus the operational changes, which the biggest impact is the decrease in surplus, operating surplus year over year.
Okay, but in sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, because in the motion that you said, you've got like 2 numbers. And
so, yeah, through the chair, I can explain that. So the motion in the capital report, so this was at the beginning of February.
Yeah.
We felt that if we could get a motion to approve the capital works, that would allow us to start the procurement process. So that's all that was about. That wasn't about the overall budget. It was just about the capital work.
Okay, can you explain the difference in the motion that's on the agenda between 1,825,000 and 1,145,000? Where are you getting that difference? That's one of them is the insulation in and insulation not included?
Correct.
Yeah, it's option 1 and then option 2.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely correct. So that's just referring to the capital work.
Okay.
So the 1.8 is doing the whole project, the 1.145 is taking out some of the work and putting it in 2025.
But it doesn't.
Okay,
But it doesn't show, this is not to do with operations, just capital plan for this, yeah. Maria, go ahead.
Yeah, this answer, I know what you're thinking, Andy, but what they're saying is this is the amount of work we're gonna do, but the actual taxation impact does not change because how we're paying for the borrowing is coming out of what we put into our plan last year for reserves, but we're using reserves to pay for our borrowing. So it's depending on how much we're pulling out of that amount to pay for the borrowing. So yes, the amount of capital work changes, but the actual amount that we're paying in a year does not change. Like what we're getting from people does not change. My question for you is around what are the implications? So there's like the monetary implications of moving the attic, right? Insulation, but it's on our capital plan for a reason. So what are the other implications of moving that a year? Like, is there significant cost savings by doing this, or is there other reasons why it was on does it help with decay of the roof? Like, is there reasons why it was put forward in the first place in this year?
so there was some thought, so the insulation in the ceiling stops the thermal bridging between the arena and the roof. So the thought was that the thermal bridging might be contributing to the roof. That could still be the case, but the thought in our discussion with the consultant is that over another year is minimal. The most important thing is getting the roof coated. Yeah. And then the other thought is just keeping the projects together would decrease procurement costs.
Supplemental, is that okay?
Yeah.
So talking with the consultant, did they give you an estimate on what they think that might be, like a decrease by adding them together, and what?
They didn't give us an estimate, just that there may be mobilization cost savings. So when we tested this, that's why we increased it by 10%, like that cost by 10%, and then said, what does that do to that overall cost? And then we still found, okay, well, there's still $100,000 difference. So there's actually almost an escalation built in of 30% that could happen inside and still be less expensive. But I think there's some other advantages when we go to option 3 for commission to consider. And so,
Would you like to go to 3?
yeah, if we could. Let's get too far. So in option 2, we've been through, did I go through the pros and cons there? Maybe not. The pro to option 2 is that there may be 2 different projects for the roof, but there is only one loan. So there's only one loan pre-repayment schedule. The minus, which is plus or minus, the arena installation is postponed to 2025. Again, just detail what those assumptions are there. The other advantage is that there's no borrowing before a potential referendum. So if that's something that we're considering for 2025, we kind of keep that nice and neat and tidy a little bit more for explanations to the public. And again, that may fit better with other project planning and communication strategy. So option 3.
Oh, Henry,
Sorry.
Henry hit me, so that's a question.
Oh, sorry.
Can't see out of that
And
eye.
I can't either, obviously.
So the 10%.
Yeah.
It's like a best guess, or?
Yeah, it's a best guess. So like right now, so what it considers is that we've seen really in the operational costs, especially like in industrial goods, there's been tremendous inflation in that. So this would, the piece there is that maybe there's a 3% increase in mobilization costs and a 7% increase in construction costs. We've seen throughout COVID about a 6 to 7% increase per year in construction cost. So that's where that's coming from. But the market is a little bit volatile right now. And so, you know, it really matters where you think supply chains and that kind of stuff are going. Yeah, but
It's a
like-
gamble no matter what you do,
Right.
right? Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure that, like, that was my sense of it, and I just wanted to make sure that
Yeah,
that sense
no.
was actually.
You know, there's a lot of big capital projects that were proposed during COVID, and where even there were some borrowing processes in recreation that were ongoing around the province. And if you've been following those, you'll know that when they budgeted that and where they're at now, they're two very different numbers. So,
People should just, like, whatever I thought was gonna happen, the opposite happened. And I think a bunch of people are in the same sort of situation, and so I've just stopped trying to guess anything.
yeah, and that's why I think I'm trying to be just very transparent
Yeah.
with what we're assuming, and that there is still this potential savings that's there. So option 3,
So page 7.
so page 7, says what happens if, like, no matter what, we've got to do that roof. So like that capital work we've got planned this year, we've got to start that. If we move the attic insulation, there's a lot of what's happening in 2025 is a lot of roof projects on the what would be the S227 side of the building, which includes roof membranes and everything like that. So this is more of a focus on what could 2025 look like. So we have a little bit of a longer preparation time frame, so that could prepare to go to referendum.
Just 1 sec.
Oh.
Allison, can you put your phone on mute or your
So,
camera on mute, or somebody put her on mute?
so Pearl, you should be able to do that as the host.
Joe, you got muted.
That is happening.
There you go.
Okay,
Thank you.
it's actually John Sokolowski
Oh,
is not muted.
can you?
Pearl,
If I mute, though, then everybody gets muted.
it's okay, if you
We can
mute
just
it, then
put it
I
on here.
can.
No.
That should show. Just-
John, can you mute your volume, like yourself on your computer?
There's John, at the very bottom of your screen, you should see what looks like a microphone. And right now, the microphone should look green. If you just click on that, you'll see it'll turn into a red circle with a slash through it.
John should be muted.
Okay, great, thank you. All right. Craig, Andy, you can hear? That's good, perfect. Thanks, Craig. All right, option 3. So option 3 is the same scenario for the capital projects as option 2. But what it says is what happens if we either go to referendum to borrow that amount, or it's part of a bigger project. So we would be borrowing $999,698 in 2025. Just note that it's a little bit more in the other scenario because I have to pay partially interest. So that difference between the $999 in option 3 and option 2 is that I have to fund the interest payment out of borrowing essentially. So it's $999. What's because we would borrow, we would have a referendum, and the potential would be that we would be drawing the money in the fall. So when we have MFA, and this is a different type of borrowing now, So the way the way borrowing repayment works on long-term borrowing is that you pay an interest payment and then you pay an interest and principal payment. And you do that twice a year. And so the way that works is that it depends upon when you draw the funds. So if we draw the funds in the fall, it means both in the first payments would be in the next year. So that's why we show the drawing of the funds in 2025, but the repayment takes place in 2026. I just chose 20 years. The reason I chose 20 years is that would most closely match the lifespan of what we are borrowing for, right? And the cost. So like those improvements should last 20 years. Okay? So that's the theory behind that piece. So then those would be the borrowing costs over the first 5 years. Again, the reason it's so dramatically less is because it's only the first 5 years of 20 years borrowing. But, so the advantages that I see in that for commission to consider would be that the borrowing period closely matches the asset lifespan. So depending upon how you think about whenever you invest in capital, some people would say you're actually then taxing the people that are getting the benefit from that capital improvement. So the negative is that it requires a referendum. So it could be included as part of referendum, and the other negative is that there are costs associated with a referendum, no matter what. No matter what is that even if the referendum failed, you still have this building, so you need to do it. You do have short-term borrowing to go back to if you need to. So you go back to option 2.
There's a fallback.
There's a fallback. So that is essentially everything else in here is exactly the same as the report last time. I think no matter what, the most critical infrastructure is prioritized. We just moved one piece to 2025. So all that recommendation is there for commission to consider is either that full piece that we do the arena installation this year. I've shown that it would require most likely 2 borrowings, one in 2024, one in 2025, or the roof attic insulation is postponed to 2025, which means that we can fund it completely from our reserves that we have in place and that requisition, and we would make that decision going into the 2025 financial.
Okay, questions?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm a little bit confused because in 2025, we're talking about a referendum for the borrowing, which I understand, but we're borrowing for 2 different services. Would they be separate referendums?
No, so in both these scenarios right now, you're just borrowing in S222. S222 is the only service that requires borrowing.
Okay.
S227 has a healthier reserve fund, so it's able to fund its capital projects over 2024 and 2025 completely from within its own resources.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just wanted to get
Yeah,
it clear.
Yeah, but if we're going to a project, this is what always makes it a little bit confusing with the services, the way they're configured right now, is that if we do go, let's say that there's a referendum project, like this would have been the case even in 2018, there was really 2 parts of that question. One was creating a new service that encompassed the whole project plus the ability to borrow. If we were just to go for borrowing, the always a complication in a referendum is if there's improvements to both sides that require borrowing, that actually might end up being two different questions. Because they're two different services that are funding.
Yeah,
Do you have any other questions?
nope, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, so just want to make sure I've got this straight in my head. So the referendum would strictly be for not the aquatic center. And if there were any improvements to the aquatic center, they would be done through the existing funds that sit in that service.
So, not referendum, just the capital projects right now?
Yes.
So yes. If, depending upon what the scope of a future project looks like, and this is why, like, in some ways, that's why I pointed that out as another advantage to pushing that one piece off,
Yeah.
is that you still have this, we're still going into a process of public engagement about this building.
Yeah.
And we don't know what that whole scope of work is at the moment.
Right.
Okay?
So just to be clear, the aquatic center is one service. All the rest of this, including the arena and the weight room.
No, sorry, the aquatic center and the weight room are in SB
Together.
27.
Yeah, they're together.
Yeah, they're together.
They're with the aquatics.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It's so confusing. Okay, and every time I think I got it straight, I don't, and I have to get it reconfirmed.
No,
Okay.
it does cause its little complications here and there.
It is it's complicated.
So there's just a couple of things that worry me is cost estimate of the roof, right? So a lot of things that have come into the city have become 30% more, some of them are 40% more, because that's just what the market, is asking. So the 10% to me, I think is pretty low, what's gonna happen next year. And then a referendum, we're putting all our our eggs in one basket, thinking a referendum's gonna pass. We're hopeful whatever project comes out of this reimagining, that will pass, with, input from all the communities. So those are a couple of things that worry me. So if we don't go in 2025 with option 3 to add it to a referendum, then it would be short-term financing?
No, through the chair, you would still have it. So let's say that we do the community engagement and there's no appetite to do an extension of any type. You could still go to referendum to borrow that money for over 20 years. But you would be borrowing it for those certain pieces.
Yeah, but the problem is if it fails.
Then you have the
then-
fallback of going to short term.
That's what asking,
Yeah, you have that no matter what.
Yeah, go ahead, Maria.
Just clarity, so the 10% escalation that you've got in a budget, that's 10% you've included in your budget numbers, but that's not including the 100,000 that you're saying are saving if we postpone it to 2025. So you're looking at 10% included in your actual numbers, plus we have another 100 grand that you would be saying that we're not paying in the borrowing. So you've got 10% plus 100 grand.
Correct.
For that buffer zone.
Yeah, so it's important to recognize both of those numbers. We used the 10% and said, so what we did, just to be clear, the numbers that we have for the cost of the, that roofing project, we updated. So remember, so we've seen that projected increase from what that number was in 2022. So we've seen that cost escalation in the estimate. And then what we said is, okay, what might we see for next year? And so I just used that number, and then the test was, is it still less expensive? If that was like those two things were equal, then that means that it's that risk to a further cost escalation would be greater. But what we're showing is that there's still $100,000 saving in there in that model still.
So you got 10% plus 100,000
Correct.
to play around with to get to where we would now be losing money next year by
Correct.
postponing that one project.
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, I have another question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so still trying to wrap my head around this because it is as Brian said, it is confusing and it's kind of following the bouncing ball. Are we going to talk about operations next before we make any motions? And why we still have the anticipated, even if we go to 2025, we still have the anticipated increases of 13.14% in service S222 and 47.85% in 227, even if we go to 2025, correct?
Yeah, because your plan, I am, like I said at the beginning, I am assuming that your plan for capital that the commission laid out in 2022 is my funding box for all work, whether I'm borrowing to do it, whether I'm putting it into reserve, or whether I am funding it directly. So that it's completely contained in that plan.
Okay, so then my question is that it's really hard to explain, no matter how well you try and do it, a 47.85% in any budget item, any service. And I understand it's all laid out there why we got a 47.85% increase in S227, that we're anticipating that, and the reasons are laid out there. Now, is there any way of offsetting some of that increase? And I'm thinking here that, I have a motion there about, is this the time for us to actually look at, like we do in our fire services and other services, to provide some funding for service S227 from Community Works funds and reduce that 47.85%? Because if we're looking at $411,000, anything that we contribute from Community Works funds, or all three of us, all three funders, will reduce that substantially. If we did 200,000, we'd cut that in half. If we did 300,000, we'd cut it by 2/3. Am I correct in my assumptions?
So the only issue with those assumptions is that right now, that 600,000 that's moving to 700,000 is in S222.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the way that we funded the capital projects in S227 this year have no impact on taxation because we're drawing from the S227 reserve. So what you're doing with that Community Works money is actually replacing the contribution from reserve in S227. So that doesn't help on that taxation side on S227. Does that make sense?
Well, but if we don't move anything from S227 to S222 and provide a grant to S222, then it does impact taxation.
So,
correct?
Yeah, so if commission was gonna consider, let's say, let's just use the difference as the number, the 100,000, going from 6 to 700,000 this year, right?
Mhm.
That number,
Mhm.
you would reduce the taxation by 100 this year with that contribution from Community Works, but it would be in S222.
Because that's where it's
Okay,
going.
so how do we reduce taxation in S227? I guess that's the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Because how do we reduce taxation? Is there any way of reducing taxation in S227 to something that's like this is just choking. When people talk to me about this, they go, what are you guys doing? Like 47.85%? There's got to be a way to fix that. Is there a way to reduce taxation in S227 and not have a 47.85% increase in that service?
Yeah, so It just matters how commission wants me to deal with this, sorry, because I'm skipping to a different report, and I don't know if that makes it more.
Yeah, so we're just gonna have, Maria has a question?
Yeah, I just my preference would be that we stick with the capital, and my opinion on the capital is that we made a decision last year to make sure that going forward, we're not offsetting to pass the buck to next year. That's why we made that decision. We need to properly fund what we know the cost of this building is gonna be. Otherwise, even let's say we take whatever money and put it in there and we say, okay, we're gonna be the contribution to reserves to pay back whatever loan we have to borrow or to pay for whatever project this year. Next year, you're just doubling that cost now the taxpayer is having to pay. So it's just offsetting the cost. And I think they're two separate conversations. So for me, I'd personally like to keep them separate. Let's have the capital conversation and then let's talk about the operations. I understand to the taxpayer, it gets put into one percentage, but we also made a decision, I think last year, might have been the year before, that we were going to keep them separate for a reason, to make sure that capital has its own funding stream and we do what we need to do there, and that operations has its own funding stream and we do what we need to do there. So for me, as one of the commissioners, I would prefer that we stick to just capital. I don't want to get into operations until we've made a decision on capital, and then let's move on to operations. I'm open if other commissioners feel differently, but if it's that'd be my suggestion, and I think we need to agree on what we're doing right now so that we don't get muddled because we're going to two different reports. So that would be my suggestion, is we stick with capital. And I think Andy's suggestion is he wants to have a conversation about both. And so I think maybe the rest of the commissioners need to make a decision on what are we doing here so that we can maximize our time.
So Chair, just for point of clarification,
Yeah, go ahead.
I am focusing on capital because what we've done, all of us do, city, area IJ, we use community works funds to pay for capital improvements to reduce the overall taxation burden on our ratepayers. Henny and I have used over $1 million in the last 2-3 years for capital projects at our fire halls from our community works funds to offset increases in taxation requisition for our ratepayers. That's the only way we funded that work. Otherwise, we'd have to tax for it. So here I am talking about a contribution to offset the capital costs of projects or a project in some amount to help reduce the overall taxation impact on ratepayers. And I want that money targeted towards the capital improvements, not anywhere else.
Yeah, go ahead, Maria.
So are you wanting to put the first part of your motion on the table right now and let's have a discussion around that?
Do you want to do your motion?
Your first part of the actual.
I think we need to understand the impact on everything, and maybe I'll defer, as long as there are no other motions coming right now, can we talk about the operations side and then make motions?
I think we're just doing capital. I think what we have in front of us is a motion for capital.
Sure. Yeah, and through the chair, the motion for capital doesn't say how you're gonna fund it.
No.
It just says, what projects are we doing in 2024? What projects are we doing? So if you look at that amount, the amount is a budget amount that's based upon the projects in the two different scenarios. Option 1, option 2. So that actually doesn't impact the next conversation, which is how do you fund the overall budget?
Yeah.
So,
right.
Okay, so Joe, through the chair, Joe, is it appropriate for me to make my first motion at this time?
We can get that later.
Because it focuses on S222, and that's where our capital projects lie right now.
right. Just what I'm saying though is that the motion only refers to the projects that we're funding. So you could make that motion in either place would work perfectly fine.
Okay, then I'd like to move at this time, my first motion, that the board approve the following amounts to be included in the 2024 financial plan. 1,825,000, is that correct, Joe?
That would be one of the choices, yes.
Yeah,
Okay, service number S222 Arena Castlegar Complex, Castlegar and areas I and J, with 375,000 in community works or other grant or funding sources to be jointly contributed by the city of Castlegar, electoral area I and electoral area J, in a percentage proportion to the rates of taxation in service number S222, enabling bylaws to help reduce the taxation impact on our ratepayers and to reduce 2024, and this could be 2024 or 2025 borrowing by $375,000 to pay for 2024 capital projects. Is that motion appropriate, Joe?
Through the chair.
I'm gonna second it, so we have a discussion
yeah,
on it.
sorry.
I'll
Okay.
second that, okay?
Through
Okay,
the-
thank you.
Through the chair, the only piece that you would change is because we're only talking about S222.
Yep.
Yeah, so we would change that, you would just need to change. No, sorry, that's
Oh, that's
perfectly
right,
fine.
yeah.
Yeah,
But it would.
Okay, can I open on it then, Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, but I'm thinking.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm trying to do is, I know there's a combined cost, to both services. And the key thing is, but if we can reduce, the 13% increase in S222, because it covers that 370 that we're looking at. And basically, it's a proportionate cost to all of us. We use community works funds to pay for capital projects. All of us do that. I calculated the cost of, very carefully on this. And I'm just saying there's got to come a time where we help out through community works funds for capital projects, and recreation is one that we can do. And then that way, when we get to the other budget, S227, we then can talk about what we can do there. But this will completely offset the cost of the 13.14% in S222. Am I correct, Joe?
yeah. I go to the other report, done so many different meetings, it gets confusing. It would mean that.
We'd have a 0%
Alright, so-
increase in S222.
Well, sorry, so again, it would be, the answer is yes, if we are if we're replacing the $700,000 of requisition with that 375. Yes, that would be the case. In fact, you would be actually reducing requisition by $5,000 over last year.
Right. So to Joe, is this an appropriate motion for us to consider?
Through the chair, I don't know that I can say it's appropriate. That's for your colleagues to say.
So let's,
But you can use community works for those items, yes.
Yeah.
so let's,
And Chair, I just got one more thing to say, just so you're aware. The first year I was on the Rec Commission, I did a $50,000 community works grant to buy a boiler for debt service S222 for the complex. First year. And basically, that was something that I did. I also want to say something else. Ever since I got on the commission, I've always talked about we need to maintain our facilities. And the other commissioners did not agree, because and basically it was kind of, we're going to be looking at this nice shiny new building. We didn't have to do that maintenance work. We didn't have to do all this stuff. We're going to go to big referendums, and we really don't have to worry about asset management planning. And when we first started on the commission, asset management plans weren't even a conversation but putting aside money for future was. And it was always, we're gonna get a big shiny new building and we don't need to have this money. And it wasn't REI that said that. Just wanna make that clear. So this is assisting again. I'm prepared to do it, and I'm hoping the other commissioners agree.
Any other question or comment, Angie?
No, that, I'm done, Chair, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Any thoughts around the table? Ryan?
Well, my experience with, in my working career with budgets, and increases, I always looked at it down to the individual number. And my calculations are right for the average homeowner in Castlegar. The increase over last year is about $76 a year. But I'm only speaking for the residents of Castlegar based on average assessments, because I have that information. I don't have any information. I don't approximately have any ratepayers in Castlegar. I don't know any of that for INJ, but that's the way I look at it. I like to put it into a number that makes sense to me. So I'm looking at $76 before $76 increase, just with the numbers as presented from Joe.
And I think last year in Area J, the average increase was around $30, $33 per household. As I understand, I don't even know how this would work, because as I understand it, and it's a bit like deja vu all over again, right? As I understand it, the city's budget is set. You don't have a bucket of money that you can dip into for this, the way we have, you know, in areas I and J, we have grant money that we can use as things arise. It's a bit different than how the city does it. And so if the city isn't able to contribute, I'm not gonna use that money that can go to other things that are needed in Area J, right? I mean, we have a plan moving forward. We set it last year. I'm comfortable with sticking to that plan. I think it's sensible and works. And so that's where I'm at.
Go ahead, and then I have some thoughts.
Yeah, you're right, Henny. Our budget is set. I've said the last 2 years when this has been proposed to you, Commissioner Davidoff, is that if you are looking at us jointly doing some kind of capital, you need to be starting that conversation in the summer. And I understand that we don't have our budget before us here in the summer, but we have a projected 5-year plan. We know we have capital coming down the pipe. And so our budget is set. It's set in December. And so I feel like, again, this is deja vu. We've had this conversation. But there's another piece that I think I do struggle with something like this, is that it seems to go back and forth around, well, I have done this for mine, and almost like the city hasn't done anything from their side. And I think that that's just not a healthy road to go down at this table. We have assets at this table we take care of, but the city also takes care of, out of city taxpayers' dollars, and a lot of assets that the region uses that we don't get taxes for. And I'm not complaining about that. I understand that that's a city's responsibility of being a municipality in the midst of residential, and half of our residents don't live in our city, which means we're funding the roads, we're funding the parks that are municipal parks that are being used, we're funding a lot of things. I'm not getting into this like we don't do our part. I know you guys do things that our residents probably use too, but I think that's a dangerous road to go down of comparing who's doing what. We all have our lanes that we fund. My third issue with doing something like this is we put a plan in place for asset management. And we said, we're gonna use this requisition to pay for our assets. As soon as 1 year, we decide to now take that money and stop collecting that, the next year, it's gonna be a burden on the taxpayer again. We're just passing it along. And so if for some reason, through this process, referendum process, whatever that is where we land, and we all need to put a chunk of money in order to get that project going, I'm not saying the city wouldn't come to the table at that point, but I'm not willing to pass tax increases off 1 year to the next year, because if you look at some of that, really what you're doing is you're offsetting some of the operations. It's not all capital that you're really offsetting. You're rather offsetting your requisition that you're getting that's going into reserve to eventually pay for our assets, or you're offsetting some of the operational, and I think both have been there. And last year, our decision to increase was strictly to put a funding stream in for our assets. So if you're saying the motion's coming from that you've always been talking about needing that, that's what we did last year, and you voted it down because it was too big of an increase. And so that is the whole goal. That's the whole goal we've done, is to try and get a funding stream so that we can start taking care of our assets. And we knew that that was gonna be big increases for a couple years. We also knew, which we're gonna get into the operations, that as soon as you start using surplus to offset your costs, that's gonna catch up to you. And that's what has happened this year. And yes, it's going to not be fun for people who have to pay that catch-up period, but we saw it coming. And if commissions before us didn't see that coming, then they were not reading the numbers properly. They were passing it along, and I am not willing to do that anymore. So I want us to make sure that whatever the cost is, we are funding it properly, and we're ripping off the Band-Aid, and we're moving forward, making sure that we're taking care of the assets that we have. So for those reasons, I would vote no to your motion.
Yeah, Andy, I appreciate again, your motion, but I'm not gonna vote in favor for it for a few things. Is we all know for years and years, there's been very limited maintenance on this building. And we're at a state now that last year we did come up with a capital asset plan to start paying for all the issues and start fixing things. And, because I think everybody here wants to have a facility that's properly maintained and looks good, so we have more people coming to it. The problem is, years and years, you know, the rec commission took money from Peter to pay Paul, and then Paul to pay Peter, and we're in this mess now. And so our plan last year was, you know, 600,000 last year, 700,000 this year, 8, 9, and $1 million. So we can start taking care of all the issues that we have, and you can see that from our 5-year plans that we have. So, you know, I am not in favor of it, and I think if we're gonna tax, we have to tax in the service that it is from, and not, because, you know, the city of Castlegar, like Maria was saying, we've already did our budget, and our taxation is different than what area I and J is, and we need to tax within the service that it's for, which is S222 and S227. So I think on that, let's have a vote.
Yeah.
All in favor of Andy's motion? Andy?
I'm in favor of the motion, Chair.
I was looking, but you know what? You keep kind of fading out. Okay, only half your hand went up.
Turns into trees.
Yeah, trees.
Yeah, I've got connectivity, just a bit of connectivity issues, but I'm trying to keep my video on.
Okay, good. All opposed? And record it. So there you go.
Chair, I don't think you can record at committee.
Yeah, oh,
I recorded in committee.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Sorry. Okay.
Only at the board.
I'm too city oriented. So we do have a motion in front of us, if I can find it. So then, Joe, on this motion, we need to know if we're doing option 1, 2, or 3.
That's right, you don't need to necessarily decide between option 2 and 3, just the capital funding amount, because that option, your choice for 2025 can come later.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would make the motion with the second amount. It sounds like there's very low risk of going the second amount for option 2 or 3, whatever that lands. And it sounds like we'll still be saving ourselves a bit, if not, hopefully 100 grand, but my guess is it won't be that high, my guess is, but at least we'll be saving ourselves a little bit, and the risk of not doing the work this year is pretty low. So, I make a recommendation, that the staff are directed to begin the procurement process for 2024 capital plan for Castlegar and District Community Facilities, Recreation, Parks and Leisure Service, Castlegar and Area I and J, service number 222, in the amount of $1,145,000, and the 2024 capital expenditures for Castlegar and Area Indoor Aquatic Center Service, Castlegar and Area J, and defined I, service number 227, in the amount of $135,000.
I'll second
Discussion?
Yeah, and so this just deals with capital, and we're gonna deal with operations. So I have another item to add to the S222 budget, but I can still do that, correct, Joe?
That's through the chair. Your second recommendation is probably more in line with the next conversation.
It's operational, I think.
Yeah.
It's operational. Okay, so, yep, thank you.
So if there's no discussion, all in favor? Opposed?
Opposed, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I was looking at you. Do we have time to do 6.2?
Sorry. It's been,
We're just seeing if we have time to do 6.2.
25 minutes, Robin?
Or 15, but I can delay him for like 10 minutes or so. I can check with him.
See if you could, maybe,
You want me to do that?
maybe 4:30, if that would be okay.
I'll email him and let you know.
I know, but we'll be quick in that one.
Just stay on track.
Okay, so we're gonna go on to 6.2, the 2024 draft operational budget report. Is that you, Joe?
Yeah, I'll take that one as well.
Okay.
So, through the chair, both of these services are much higher impacts to requisition than either of our other really large services. And that's a couple of pieces, and I think we've already sort of highlighted it in the last one. It is that change in what we were funding operations with surplus for in the last 2 years. So in S222, part of that is that $100,000 increase in the capital asset management plan. So that is strictly in S222 this year. It does start to move into S227 next year. The other big piece is that decrease in operational surplus. So there still is a small operational surplus coming forward this year in S222, but that's primarily carrying forward a donation made to the Glade Regional Park project. So that money is moving forward from 2023 into 2024. The decrease in projected revenue is at this point is primarily around that our projection for lost revenue in from the Pioneer. There are some savings in salary there, but that savings, there's also the increasing of other pieces in that area that that more than offset it. So the other piece that we're seeing, again, we went over this a little bit, just because we have new guests here, is that we are seeing decreased revenue in room rentals and those kinds of things. Has been a trend, unfortunately, can't really count COVID that much, but since we've come out of COVID, that part of our business has not recovered to pre-COVID levels. We do have funding for the consulting and the Canadian municipality, funding for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Net Zero Asset Management Strategy Project. There was a question that came from the public on this. Yes, that grant money, that grant and all of that stuff has been signed, sealed, and I think we've actually awarded the contract for that project. there are what we call transfers to other services. So in regional districts, we have to recover or at least apportion out the costs that we project to be funded for each service, whether from our general administration, information and technology, and community services that gets funded to, that helps support these services. So there's about an 8.28% increase in those costs overall from last year, which impacts taxation by about 1.29%. And the big piece is that there are increases in overall employee expenses. It's a little bit different in S222 than it is in S227. A little bit not so much about a change in service level, but just a change in the actual cost. That's a little bit of a different story in S227. So that's S222. Just move on to S227. Okay. S227 is where the biggest change is. It's about a 47.85% increase in requisition. I did change this, I gotta admit my reports, I believe, for the other services were better. I changed the way I looked at it, but I'll stick with this one.
But we want better too.
Yeah, I know. I apologize. I just learned from this one. Again here, $218,488 of that is what we funded through surplus. So it's not a change in the operating budget or anything like that. It's what we funded, how we funded the service last year. There's about $16,000 decrease in projected revenue. Again, this service, we've seen a slower coming out of COVID than we have in Creston or Nelson. And we do believe that that's primarily being driven by the fact that fitness doesn't drive this service as much as it drives those two other services. And that really does come from a lack of space in the fitness center. But we do have plans in this year's staffing complement to try and drive fitness a little harder here. Again, an increase in those transfers to general admin, information tech, and community services. Here, the employee expense increase is not only due to the inflationary cost increase, but also due to staffing up the aquatic center and the fitness services. So there's a little bit more of a combination in this service. So we talked about the capital reserve funding kind of at length, about the reserves. In S22, just trying to think, we'll see what I have in my other notes here.
So we're still working on the options.
Yeah, it's the biggest piece here is that there's staffing increased costs, revenues haven't recovered as quickly as the other services coming out of COVID, and we had significant funding of operations from operational surplus in 2023.
Any questions on that? So our March 5th meeting, we'll have some options. Is that the plan?
March 5th for operational piece?
Yeah. Are we gonna have more?
It'll be adopted then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll have another final review, but I don't know that there's nothing I can do about the surpluses.
Okay, so we'll just on March 5th.
Yeah.
I just have a quick
Okay,
question.
just a minute. Yeah, sorry. We'll have questions in a minute, sorry. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I would really love to see our CFO and CAO and staff do a deep dive into this service and and come up with some options for our March 5th meeting before we adopt, our final motion, budget for 2024. And I trust that will occur, correct, Joe?
Yes,
Yeah,
Okay.
you guys want to kick at the can?
yeah, we'll do another.
Thank you.
Yes, Marie.
Yeah, just my last comment, I think I said it last time, whatever that kick at the can is, I do not want to be passing the buck to next year. Whatever we need to do to fund the service for whatever level it needs to be funded, let's just make sure it gets funded. If there is ways to save money, of course, but I don't want it to turn into something where we're just passing it along, so let's make sure that we keep that lens. From my perspective, I'm willing to, let's put it whatever level we need it to be at the end of the day. But of course, if there's ways that are not gonna negatively impact it and you can save us money, that's great.
I agree with what Maria just said. Sooner or later, you have to bite the bullet. We made the decision to do this last year. We've got to stay the course, otherwise we're just kicking it down the road for someone else, and it's gonna get worse, not better.
So, through the chair, when we build our budgets, we build them to meet the service levels that we've defined previously. Are there any service levels that you want us to consider reducing?
Where's look, I've been away.
Yeah.
Are we back to pre-COVID at the aquatic center yet? Yeah, so we're still having reduced services, and I get that it due to a shortage of lifeguards, but still, there's some of us that, me included, that really miss being able to come to the pool on a Tuesday or Thursday morning. I can't believe how busy I am with this stuff, and I haven't been able to get back to the pool for months now. And part of it is just a lack of available hours. And I know I'm just one person that is struggling with that. Lots of people are. And so a further reduction in service, I think we've all suffered through enough service reduction. I meant to turn this down, I'm sorry. Oh, God, it's the collision center. Anyway.
Speaking of budgets. To decrease the services, I think would be absolutely the wrong, it's bad enough to have to increase the cost without being able to improve the service. To turn around and try to offset that by reducing the service when, sometimes we have lineups for people waiting to use the pool.
Mm-hmm.
So
Which is a good thing.
well,
Unless you're
that's
in
the
the
lineup. To me, reducing the service is just a non-starter.
And I think from your budget though, you're gonna try to increase the aquatic staff for this year and in the weight room. So that's the emphasis this year, so
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, you have a building, we have a building, we should be using it to its full potential.
Okay, understood. Yeah, just like the question.
Yeah, so if there's no more questions, we're just gonna open it up to question period. So we have, the
Does Andy
public.
want to do his?
Here, I've got a motion to make. It's okay.
I'm just gonna bring up my phone. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, go ahead.
Jenna has it, everyone has this, so that the board approve the following amounts to be included in the 2024 and each year in the 2024 to 2028 financial plan. $25,000 in service number S222, Arena, Castlegar Complex, Castlegar Areas I and J, to support the social, cultural, and recreational activities offered at the following electoral I venues or provided by the following area I-based community organizations to be allocated as follows. Pass Creek Community Hall, $2,500. Pass Creek Neighborhood Association, $2,500. Sure Acres Community Hall, $2,500. Kieran Galbraith Memorial Park, Sure Acres Beach, $2,500. Glade Recreation Commission Society, $2,500. Glade Community Hall, $2,500. Terry's Community Hall, $2,500. Berrigan Memorial Park, $2,500. And Brilliant Cultural Center, $5,000. And if there's a seconder, I'll open.
I'll second it for discussion. Let's
Thanks,
open it
Chair.
up. Discussion, do you have thoughts on that, Andy?
Yeah, basically, I think these are all the places and all the organizations that provide cultural and recreational services in Area I. The mandate in the enabling bylaws for Service S22 is very clear that it's not just recreation that's supported, it's also cultural activities. And the key thing is that we have never supported through the Rec Commission, through Service S22, any of these Area I organizations or facilities. They've all been supported through Area I funding sources. And the key thing is that I think it's time we recognize that recreation and culture don't just occur in Castlegar. They occur in Area I and they occur in Area J. And I believe this would be, $25,000 is not a monstrous amount of money per year to support what happens in Area I. And I think people would be surprised that there's so much happening there. Maybe rec commissioners weren't aware that this is all the places and all the things that go on in organizations that do recreation and culture for us in our area. And it's really valued by Area I residents. So, Chair, that's my motion, and thank you for seconding it.
Yeah, no problem. We'll open up for discussion. Any thoughts? Anybody?
So this would be coming out of the Rec Commission rate.
Yeah,
So
operational, yeah.
what you're
operational.
looking at is adding about $7 per ratepayer for it. To take the big number and make it an understandable number for me. But I'm curious about whether the services would be used by residents from J or Castlegar, sorry.
Well, and I don't know how it works in Area I. I mean, I thought the USCC owned the Brilliant Cultural Center. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I think like in Area J, the community halls are run and operated by volunteer societies who then charge for the use of the halls. And, we do give grants, like I've given grants to various things in the community, whether it's, redoing the stones, the headstones at the Robson Cemetery, and things like that. But those are run by, it's my understanding, and Joe, I'm sure you'll correct me. I'm sure I'll get corrected if I'm wrong. Non-profit societies, volunteers are doing the work. People donate money. The area directors donate money. And I guess, if someone has a shaker at the Robson Hall and I buy a ticket and decide to go, I fund that way as a member of the community. The Udashenia Hall is owned and operated by the USCC. which I think Brilliant Cultural Center is too. So the concern I have about, this seems kind of divisive to me. And I don't want to be the person who jumps on and says, well, hang on, what about my halls? I want this much for my halls. Because as far as I know, they're working okay and people are happy. Like, I haven't had any complaints from anyone saying that the community halls have not been properly supported. So something that just benefits one of the parties to this rec commission, it really, it feels divisive to me. I don't know how else to put it.
Maria?
Yeah, I wrestle with this too. I understand, making sure that money is not just flowing one way. I've heard you speak of that, Commissioner Davidoff, and I do understand that. And I'm not even opposed to, as we go forward, if we go through our process of going out to communities in all three areas and figuring out what they all want in order to properly fund what we already have and what does that look like. I'm not opposed to, in the future, putting something in our budget for a project in Area I. This to me is just too vague. Like, it's not coming from the halls. It's not, we don't really know what it's for. And so I agree with Henny, like, it's kind of saying, okay, well, why is one area getting specific money for just halls, whereas the other two aren't, because we all have halls. But if it was like, okay, there's a project, we're doing a project with the Glade, right, in Area I, or it's for this, or having a certain amount of money that's in our budget every year to make sure that something is going towards something in Area I. I'm not opposed to that in the future. This motion doesn't hit that mark for me. And I think we'll have more clarity once we go out and find out from the community in all three areas. What does that look like? What would something that is equitable to all three look like? I'm not opposed to shifting what we've done. This just isn't, I think that this is not the way to do it though. And we've already got a huge tax increase, so to add any more when we're already saying, hey, go staff, try and figure out how to take stuff out, also is like, well, I'm not sure how you do that.
Brian, and then I'm gonna call the question.
Through the chair to Joe. If I understand the money that we allocate to S22 and S227 is under your control and there's checks and balances with the budget, right?
Mm.
If we were to just start funding these, where's the process for the accounting of, we asked for, in the city, we asked for accounting from the Heritage Society, the Art Gallery.
Contract.
Right.
By a contract.
So we'd essentially, in my mind, it's almost like we're giving out a grant, but we don't have the authorization to give grants, correct?
No, sorry, I don't mean to say no. Through the chair, you can give recreational grants. So that's part of, so it's actually inside your service establishment bylaw that tells us what we can fund. In this case, S222 in particular, as we looked at in strategic planning, is very broad, so it does allow you to fund in that way. And we do have services that do it. Aren't the most, in Preston, there are significant funds that go to nonprofit community-owned properties that through the years that commission has said they provide enough public good that we'll do that. Nelson has got a very much smaller allotment that they make groups apply for. It goes more to what Maria was suggesting. They do it more to fund studies and those kinds of things.
A project.
Project-specific things. So it's done differently. And in other places, we have direct contribution services that directly contribute to a particular hall in a defined area. So we have many different ways that we have delivered that.
Well, I would be supportive of doing something in the project, but I think I can't support this in this till we get more information in the form of.
So on that note, I'm gonna call the question because we have 5 minutes for questions. All in favor?
I'm in favor.
All opposed? Motion fails. And on that note, I'm gonna ask for questions now, so we have 5 minutes because we have to go into another meeting.
Yeah.
If you have questions, I'm gonna start online. Does anybody online have a question? If so, unmute your phone.
She definitely has.
Doesn't look like it's. No, I'm gonna go in here if anybody has a question. Yes.
First of all, I'm glad I'm retired.
Yeah.
I
was, yeah.
Secondly, I came down to ask whether or not, it's my understanding that the commission is considering a referendum in 2025 in the city and areas I and J. It's important that funding be secured in 24 in order to have a 25 referendum. So that's my question to the commission. It's important because the commission has to show leadership and be out ahead of this thing. And so is there 100,000 or 200,000 allocated for spending this year? That might be the whole project value to take it to referendum. But there is expenses in 24 if this thing's gonna happen in 25. And it would be, in my mind, irresponsible to cheer on people for a referendum if there's no money.
So the quick answer is we have about $52,000 for that. But the problem is, Jim, we don't know what the project is gonna be until after we go through this reimagining.
But aren't there two things going on here at once? There's the Recreation Reimagining Program, which is
trying to figure out,
valid initiative.
yeah.
But also at the same time, there's a number of folks involved that are considering or are thinking about a referendum in 25.
Well, so basically we have to get through that reimagining exercise.
See, I don't think you can do it. It would be a false statement to say that we're gonna have a referendum in 25. At first, we have to completely reimagine it, because
Yeah,
the
'cause we don't know what
reimagining thing,
project-
if you have consultants,
Yeah.
is gonna take longer than you think.
So we're hoping that finishes in June,
Scheduled for the end of June.
end of June. And then we'll take that information and come back to the board and
But it'd be too late for any expenditures in 24, unless there's a surplus. Is the 52,000, is there a,
That's funded through acquisition.
yeah.
okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But the reimagining cost, is that estimated at 52,000?
Yes.
So there is no money allocated for referendum expenses in 24.
Oh, but we can add that.
Yeah, and it's I understand what the question is, because referendums typically cost around 40,000. Jim will help me very well. But there is no money, but we could, if commission was to choose to go to referendum in the fall of 2024, it could have
Fall
been.
of 24.
Yeah.
Well, so if it chose, like, to do it that quickly, it could amend the budget, knowing that it may need to recover those costs in 2025. So it could do an amendment to the budget. If it feels that through this reimagining process, that we're at a point that we could go to referendum, it could do that. It could even, if it felt we're at a point but we need to add more, it could amend the budget, could even potentially draw from other sources of funding to fund the next step.
So ideally, we would like to go to referendum sometime at the end of 2024 with the information.
Feel that's doable?
Well,
It's February,
yeah.
it'll soon March.
Yeah, so we're optimistic that we're gonna have something. So just stay tuned.
Okay,
Yeah, we're very purpose in this, right? And we just want this whole reimagining thing to get off the ground so we can get some answers.
And please come to the meetings.
Yeah, be a part of that.
Yeah.
Did anybody?
That's why I retired.
Yeah, yes.
I have a quick comment. First of all, I'm curious why you can't get our directors the budget proposals in a timely fashion. It's my understanding that Director Hanegraaff didn't get hers till the evening before, and Director Davidoff didn't get his a day and a half before. That doesn't give them any time to digest, decipher, and come up with any kind of solutions on
So
how to deal with the budget.
You're talking about the budget, information that was presented at the RDCK board meeting
I
on.
thought I saw at the February 6th meeting I watched online that you got it the evening before.
I was
for
struggling
the-
on the February 6th meeting.
And I
can say
believe
that.
Director Davidoff didn't get it until a day and a half before.
Yeah, so
That's not
typically
even
we have
reasonable.
so typically we have a meeting on a Tuesday and we get our usually Thursday night or Friday morning, we get our agenda. So basically this agenda that we had here, nothing really changed from, what we had before, except that option 3 and, the number, the 1 million.
Which are both substantial in
Yeah.
my estimation.
Yeah, so we
Not to
do,
mention that Director Davidoff came up with some pretty creative solutions, which unfortunately were voted down. I think it's pretty tough to sell a 40% increase in taxation for any service, especially when you're talking about possibly decreasing that level of service. Just my opinion.
there,
Now, my question, if I may.
yeah, we're just.
I'm curious if the space for the recreation center isn't large enough to get usership and membership in. How is hiring more staff going to be beneficial?
Take that one.
Yeah, so through the chair, what we are talking about are maybe two different things. The staff, last year, when we did the budget, our staffing budget was less because we were projecting that we already had problems with staffing and lifeguarding, for example. So we reduced what that staffing contingent budget was. So as has been said, we were closed Tuesdays, is it Tuesdays and Thursdays?
Yes,
Penny-
Tuesdays.
Penny keeps me well aware
Open
of what the
till 2
difference
o'clock.
is.
And during
So-
lifeguard training as well.
That's right, and so that's been the struggle. So this year, the budget in S227 is budgeting for a full complement of staff to be able to be open those 2 days. And we still have a staffing issue with this number of staff that we have. So those two things are playing in the budget. So what's always difficult about services that are in government is that we get part of our revenue from user fees and part of our revenue from taxation. In order to be able to be open Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have to project that we have that funding available in requisition in order to do it. So that's the first step, that's the guarantee. The user fees are the variable piece in our budgets.
Yeah.
I don't know if that explains it, but that's the struggle that we're in.
I could have swore I heard that the problem was the space.
I'm sorry, that was with fitness center.
It's
Are
just
you
small.
hiring more fitness center staff?
We are hiring more fitness because there's two pieces in the fitness center. It is the supervision of the space because the space is small. So it has a limited capacity. But by the space being small, we have a usage that is sometimes disrespectful in it if we don't have staff monitoring it, which decreases the use of this. It's kind of like this vicious circle that decreases the usage of the space because people aren't being courteous with one another. So by increasing the supervision, we hope to increase the efficiency of the use of the space to keep the use high, at its highest possible level. And but one of the answers once we have that in place and we get that, is to try and expand that space so that we can accommodate more people. But right now, we need to have staff in there to accommodate more people and just getting people to be courteous in the space.
And move around so
And
other
moving,
people
yeah.
can use the thing. But on that note, I'm gonna have to call adjournment because we are late already for our second, so I'm sorry. Yeah, if you have a question, you can reach out to one of us.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, yeah, please.
we're
do.
easy to find.
Yeah, please do send us, an email or call us. And thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Thank you for your argument.
Good luck. Thanks, we need it.
I'm worried to say you're gonna need it.
See you, old boss.
Yeah.
Can I just see, my car is in.
Yeah, it's hard, thank you. Thank you, guys.
Oh,
Have a good evening.
I see you guys.
Hi.
Hey, Bree. I just need to check and see if.
No, it's the same. So Rob should.
I need that.
My car in May or June. And it's time to get it.
Sorry you're late, Bree.
Fire service is not 25%.
I'm glad you had to purchase it. Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness, Brian.
I've been waiting to throw that one out.
Oh, goodness.
Are you guys, hey, you guys were still on.
Feel free to come.
Are you guys disconnecting? I think it's another,
It should be the same link.
is it the same that she sent out?
Yeah, pretty sure it's the same link, because I asked Rob if he had the link.
Yeah, because she sent it out at
Oh,
12:03.
Yeah,
And she sent it today.
Yeah.
through Andy.
It's 12:02.
Yeah, yes,
If you look, you have an email from Jenna.
Yeah.
At 12:03 with a new WebEx link for the next meeting.
yeah, okay, yeah, I kind of figured there's I'll just want to log on to the next one.
Perfect, thanks, Andy.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
I'll be at the library tomorrow, I want to talk to Laura. Yeah.